Picture this. You're a sailor aboard the USS Jason Dunham, a cutting-edge American destroyer slicing through the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. The sun is beating down, the radar screens glow softly in the Combat Information Center, and suddenly, two fighter jets scream overhead at low altitude. Venezuelan F-16s. Close enough to see the national markings. Close enough to feel the roar of their engines. Close enough to send a message. What happened next would set off a chain reaction that transformed the entire Caribbean into one of the most heavily militarized zones on Earth, with over 4,500 American Marines, 7 warships, and a nuclear submarine converging on the region. This is the story of a flyover that became a flashpoint, and how the United States answered Venezuela's challenge with overwhelming force. The encounter that changed everything. September 4th started like any other day for the crew of the Jason Dunham. This Arleigh Burke-class destroyer was conducting routine operations in international waters, well within the legal boundaries of the Caribbean Sea. The crew had been at sea for weeks, maintaining the presence that Washington considers essential for regional stability. Navigation officers plotted courses. Lookouts scanned the horizon. The ship's sophisticated Aegis combat system monitored the airspace for hundreds of miles in every direction. Then, without warning, 2 Venezuelan F-16 Fighting Falcons appeared on approach vectors, closing the distance rapidly. The Combat Information Center suddenly came alive. Radar operators called out the contacts. The Tactical Action Officer evaluated the threat level. The captain was immediately informed. The pilots brought their aircraft dangerously close to the American warship, close enough that the encounter could not be dismissed as coincidental or accidental. This was deliberate. This was theater. This was Venezuela sending Washington a very public message. We see you, we're watching you, and we're not intimidated. For the sailors aboard the Jason Dunham, this wasn't just another day at sea anymore. This was the kind of incident that gets reported up the chain of command within minutes, the kind that lands on desks at the Pentagon, the kind that diplomats start making phone calls about. Because when military aircraft from one nation deliberately approach the warships of another in international waters, it's not just aviation, it's geopolitics written in jet fuel and aggressive maneuvering. The Pentagon's response was immediate and unequivocal. Officials in Washington labeled the maneuver highly provocative and issued a stern warning to Caracas. Do not attempt to obscure, deter, or interfere with United States military operations in international waters. That carefully chosen language revealed everything. The Americans were making it crystal clear that their ships had every legal right to be exactly where they were, and that any attempt to challenge that presence would be met with consequences. But words alone weren't going to be enough. The United States was about to demonstrate just how serious it was about maintaining freedom of navigation in the Caribbean. Venezuela's aging aerial arsenal. To understand what Venezuela was really capable of in this encounter, we need to talk about those F-16s. These aren't the cutting-edge fighters you see launching from American carriers or European air bases. Venezuela's F-16 fleet dates back to the 1980s, when the country purchased 24 of these aircraft during a very different era of U.S.-Venezuelan relations. Back then, Venezuela was a major oil exporter, with cash to spend and relatively friendly ties to Washington. The F-16 sale was seen as routine, just another Latin American nation modernizing its air force with American equipment. These are Block 15 variants, early generation models that lack the advanced avionics, long-range weapon systems, and sophisticated targeting capabilities that define modern air combat. When these aircraft rolled off the production line, the Cold War was still raging, personal computers were barely a thing, and the idea of networked warfare was science fiction. To put it in perspective, the F-16s that Venezuela flies are older than many of the pilots who fly them. After nearly 38 years of use, along with crippling difficulties in obtaining spare parts due to deteriorating relations with Washington, Venezuela's once proud F-16 fleet has shrunk dramatically. Intelligence assessments suggest that only about a dozen of these aircraft remain fully operational today. Some days that number might tick up slightly, other days it drops. Maintenance is a constant struggle. Parts are sourced through gray markets or cannibalized from other aircraft. Venezuelan technicians have become remarkably creative at keeping these birds flying, but there's only so much you can do when the manufacturer has cut you completely off. It's a testament to Venezuelan ingenuity that any of these fighters are still flying at all. But let's be clear about their capabilities. These F-16s are equipped primarily with short-range air-to-air missiles, sidewinders acquired decades ago, possibly some Israeli-made Python missiles obtained through third-party channels. These are weapons designed for dogfighting within visual range, the kind of close-quarters aerial combat that rarely happens anymore in modern warfare, where engagements often occur at distances of 50 miles or more. For ground attack missions, the Venezuelan F-16s can carry unguided bombs and rocket pods, the same type of ordnance that requires pilots to fly dangerously close to their targets. There's no evidence that this fleet has been upgraded with modern precision-guided munitions or advanced targeting pods. They're fast, they're agile, and in the hands of a skilled pilot they can still be threatening, but they're fundamentally outclassed by modern systems. It's worth noting that Venezuela actually operates more advanced aircraft, Russian-made Su-30 flankers, which are larger, more modern, and capable of carrying heavier payloads. But those aircraft are even fewer in number and face similar maintenance challenges. The relationship with Russia has provided some relief, but even Moscow can't completely solve the spare parts crisis. The F-16s, despite their limitations, remain the most visible symbol of Venezuelan air power, a reminder of what the country once had and what it's struggling to maintain. The American response, not just words. While Venezuelan pilots were returning to base after their provocative flyover, American military planners were already setting in motion a response that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Caribbean. This wasn't going to be just a diplomatic protest or a strongly worded statement. Fighter jets were immediately repositioned to Puerto Rico, establishing air cover that could respond within minutes to any future incidents. But that was just the beginning. What followed was a massive, coordinated deployment of naval and amphibious forces that demonstrated exactly what freedom of navigation means when backed by American military might. Reports confirmed that at least 7 United States warships moved into or near the Caribbean in the weeks following the incident. This wasn't a hasty reaction. It was a carefully orchestrated show of force that had clearly been planned as a contingency. Leading this armada were destroyers like the Jason Dunham herself and her sister ship, the USS Gravely. These Arleigh Burke-class destroyers represent the backbone of American naval surface power. They're designed as multi-mission platforms, capable of engaging aircraft, intercepting ballistic missiles, launching cruise missiles at land targets, conducting anti-submarine warfare, and escorting high-value assets, all, if necessary, simultaneously. Each destroyer bristles with vertical launch cells carrying dozens of missiles, advanced radar systems that can track hundreds of targets at once, and enough firepower to overwhelm most adversaries. These ships cost over $1.8 billion each to build, and they represent decades of technological advancement. Their Aegis combat systems can manage threats that would overwhelm human operators, sorting targets, prioritizing responses, and coordinating defensive measures in fractions of a second. When a destroyer like the Jason Dunham is operating in an area, it's not just a single ship. It's a mobile command center that can control the airspace and sea space for hundreds of miles around. Joining them was the USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser that recently transited through the Panama Canal specifically to reinforce the Caribbean presence. Cruisers are increasingly rare in the modern U.S. Navy. There are fewer than 24 left in active service, but they bring capabilities that make them invaluable in high-threat environments. The Lake Erie carries even more missiles than the destroyers, with 122 vertical launch cells compared to the destroyer's 90 or 96. Historically, cruisers have served as the centerpiece of American naval air defense, coordinating the protective umbrella that shields entire battle groups from aerial attack. Having the Lake Erie in theater signals that Washington wants layered, redundant air defense coverage, the kind of protection you deploy when you're taking potential threats very seriously. Then there's the submarine. The Pentagon confirmed that a nuclear-powered attack submarine was operating somewhere in the Caribbean, though naturally they refused to specify exactly where. This is standard practice. The whole point of submarine operations is that nobody knows where they are until it's too late. These boats can remain submerged for months, powered by nuclear reactors that never need refueling during the submarine's operational lifetime. They can appear anywhere, at any time, carrying enough firepower to change the strategic calculus of an entire region. The submarine's presence adds an invisible, but absolutely critical dimension to American power projection, a reminder that what you can see on the surface is only part of the story.
The Marines. 4,500 reasons to think twice. But the most significant element of this deployment wasn't the warships, it was the Marines. At the heart of the American buildup is an amphibious ready group led by the USS Iwo Jima, a massive flat-decked amphibious assault ship that looks, from a distance, remarkably like a small aircraft carrier. The Iwo Jima doesn't carry conventional fighter jets. Instead, its deck is crowded with helicopters, MV-22 Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft, and occasionally F-35B Lightning II vertical takeoff fighters, depending on mission requirements. But its real purpose is to serve as a floating base for hundreds of Marines who can be launched ashore at a moment's notice. The Iwo Jima doesn't operate alone. Sailing in formation with her are two dock landing ships, the USS San Antonio and USS Fort Lauderdale. These vessels are specifically designed to carry Marines, landing craft, amphibious assault vehicles, heavy equipment, and all the supplies needed to sustain operations ashore. Together, these three ships form what's called an amphibious ready group, a complete, self-contained package capable of projecting overwhelming force from sea to land in a matter of hours. And what exactly are they carrying? The 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, a highly trained force comprising over 4,500 sailors and Marines. This isn't just a large group of troops, it's a carefully balanced combined arms force that includes its own aviation squadron, a ground combat battalion with tanks and artillery, and comprehensive logistics support. The 22nd MEU is trained to pivot seamlessly between high-intensity combat operations and humanitarian assistance missions. They can secure a hostile beach, conduct helicopter raids deep inland, provide disaster relief after hurricanes, evacuate American citizens from crisis zones, or seize and hold key infrastructure, often switching between these missions with little notice. These Marines have been training for exactly this type of rapid response scenario. They practice amphibious landings in all weather conditions, from calm seas to heavy surf. They rehearse helicopter insertions, both day and night. They coordinate with naval gunfire support and airstrikes. Every Marine in the unit knows their role, has practiced it repeatedly, and can execute it under pressure. This is what readiness looks like. The most revealing detail? Marines from the 22nd MEU have been photographed conducting extensive training operations in southern Puerto Rico, including amphibious landings, flight operations, and combat rehearsals. Southern Puerto Rico. Let that sink in. They're not training somewhere abstract or distant. They're rehearsing right next to the southern Caribbean, exactly where Venezuelan F-16s challenged the Jason Dunham. The message couldn't be clearer. If things escalate, American Marines can be on the scene in hours, not days. They're close enough to smell the salt air from Venezuelan waters. What this really means? Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Two aging Venezuelan F-16s flew near an American destroyer. On the surface, that's a minor incident, the kind of thing that happens occasionally when militaries operate in close proximity. Russian aircraft buzz American ships in the Baltic. Chinese jets intercept surveillance planes near Taiwan. Iranian speedboats swarm Navy vessels in the Persian Gulf. These encounters happen, they get reported, and usually nothing comes of them. But the American response has been anything but proportional. 7 warships, a nuclear submarine, over 4,500 Marines, advanced air cover from Puerto Rico. This is a massive show of force, far exceeding what would be necessary to simply respond to a couple of fighter jets. You don't deploy an entire Marine expeditionary unit because 2 planes flew too close to one of your ships. You do it because you're sending a message that resonates far beyond the immediate incident. So what's really happening here? This is about deterrence, signaling, and establishing unambiguous dominance in a region that the United States has considered within its sphere of influence for over 2 centuries. The Monroe Doctrine might be an outdated concept in polite diplomatic circles, but its underlying logic still drives American strategic thinking about the Western Hemisphere. By deploying such overwhelming force so quickly, Washington is sending multiple messages simultaneously. To Venezuela, your F-16s got close, but look at what we can bring to bear if you push further. To other regional powers watching this unfold, the Caribbean remains an American lake, and challenges to that reality will be met with decisive responses. To allies and partners in the region, we're here, we're committed, and we have the capability to respond to any crisis that threatens stability or your security. And perhaps most importantly, to domestic audiences back home. Despite challenges in other theaters, despite budget debates and strategic uncertainty, the United States military can still project decisive power when and where it chooses. The historical echo. There's a historical parallel worth noting here. During the Cold War, the Caribbean was a constant flashpoint. Soviet ships delivering missiles to Cuba nearly triggered nuclear war in 1962. Throughout the 1980s, American warships regularly patrolled these same waters, watching for arms shipments, interdicting drug traffickers, and projecting power. The strategic importance of the Caribbean has never diminished. It's the gateway to the Panama Canal, the approach to the Gulf of Mexico, and home to critical shipping lanes that carry billions of dollars in trade every year. But what's different now is that Venezuela has positioned itself as a challenger to American regional dominance in ways that Cuba, even at the height of Soviet support, never quite managed. The rhetoric from Caracas has grown increasingly bold, the military posturing more frequent, and incidents like the September 4th flyover suggest a willingness to test boundaries that previous generations of Latin American leaders carefully avoided. The question nobody's asking: here's what makes this situation genuinely concerning. Neither side can afford to back down. Venezuela has painted itself into a corner by making such a public challenge. To simply ignore American operations now would look like weakness to domestic audiences that the Maduro government desperately needs to keep supportive. The regime has built its legitimacy partly on standing up to Yankee imperialism, and backing down now would undermine that narrative. But escalating further invites confrontation with a military that outmatches Venezuelan forces by orders of magnitude. Meanwhile, the United States has committed enormous resources to this show of force. 7 warships don't deploy themselves. The 22nd MEU can't train in Puerto Rico indefinitely. There are other global commitments, other theaters that need attention. China is building artificial islands in the South China Sea. Russia continues its war in Ukraine. The Middle East remains unstable. American military resources, while vast, are not infinite. How long can this Caribbean posture be sustained? And more importantly, what happens if Venezuela calls the bluff and conducts another provocation? Does the United States escalate further, deploy even more forces? At what point does demonstration become actual confrontation? The Caribbean has transformed from a relatively quiet backwater into one of the most densely militarized bodies of water on the planet, all because of one flyover on September 4th. The warships are still there. The Marines are still training. The fighters are still on alert in Puerto Rico. And Venezuelan F-16s are still flying. This isn't over. In fact, it might just be beginning. The question isn't whether there will be another incident. It's what happens when there is. Because in a game of military chicken between nations, somebody eventually has to swerve. And right now, with billions of dollars in military hardware facing off across a few hundred miles of Caribbean water, with thousands of sailors and Marines on heightened alert, with aging Venezuelan jets still capable of making one more provocative pass, nobody's blinking. The next move could come from either side, and when it does, the entire world will be watching to see whether this remains a carefully choreographed demonstration of force or whether the Caribbean is about to become the stage for something far more dangerous.